Imagine yourself floating in the middle of the vast, endless ocean. No land in sight, just the deep, dark blue stretching infinitely in every direction. You glance down, and that's when you see it. A shadow, massive and silent, moving beneath you. Your heart races, your breath quickens. What is that? Is it watching you ... or waiting for you? This is the moment everything changed for me. It wasn't just a fear, it became an obsession. The ocean, once peaceful and serene, turned into a bottomless void filled with secrets I wish I'd never discovered. What I saw that day still haunts me, and after hearing this story, it might haunt you too. This is how thalassophobia was born from, and after this, you might just fear the ocean forever. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. You're floating in a vast, endless ocean. There's no land in sight, just an infinite stretch of deep, dark blue in every direction. It's peaceful at first, the soft sway of the water, the warmth of the sun on your skin. But then, something changes. You feel it before you see it. A shift beneath you. Slowly, you look down and there it is. A shadow, massive, moving silently just below the surface. Your heart stops. Your mind races. What was that? You wonder. Was it just passing by? Or was it watching you? This exact feeling, that creepy, primal dread of what lies beneath, has a name. Thalassophobia, the fear of deep, open water. It's a fear that many of us feel instinctively, and if you trace it back far enough, it starts to make a lot of sense. But what if I told you that, at one point in Earth's history, this fear didn't even exist? Believe it or not, there was a time when the oceans were safe, no monsters lurking below, no predators hunting in the depths, just calm, open water. To find that era, we have to travel back way further than you might think. Not thousands, not millions, but hundreds of millions of years into the past. Back to the Cambrian period, about 500 million years ago. Back then, the oceans were teeming with life, but none of it was dangerous to something like you or me. It was actually one of the last times in Earth's history where you could confidently swim in the ocean without the risk of becoming something's next me. But things didn't stay that way for long. Life evolved, creatures got bigger, smarter, and a whole lot scarier. And that's when it all went wrong. The age of safety in the seas came to a brutal, terrifying end. And from that moment on, thalassophobia was practically written into our DNA. But when did it all change? What moment in Earth's story marked the shift from peaceful waters to a swirling cauldron of nightmare? Some might point to the Ordovician period, when the first massive predators appeared, like ancient cephalopods the size of small buses. But even then, the seas weren't truly horrifying. No, the real turning point came later, around 419 million years ago, in an era known as the Devonian, also called the Age of Fish. This is where everything gets worse. Much worse. Imagine a world where 85% of the planet is covered in water, compared to 70% today. A true water world, where oceans stretch so far and wide that you could drift for thousands of miles in any direction without spotting a single island or coastline. Welcome to the Devonian. If you have thalassophobia, this era would have been your worst nightmare come to life. During this time, Earth's map looked nothing like it does today. Instead of continents like Africa or South America, you find strange landmasses like Euramerica, a single supercontinent made up of what is now North America and Europe. But it wasn't just the land that looked bizarre. The oceans were home to creatures that make modern sharks look like cuddly pets. It was here, in these ancient waters, that the scariest sea monsters of all time emerged. Giant armored fish with jaws like guillotine, creatures with spikes, plates, and teeth in places they shouldn't be. This was the birthplace of the true horrors of the deep, and the real moment when humans, had they existed back then, would have learned to fear the ocean forever. Now, if you were to head south during the Devonian, you'd come face to face with the largest landmass of the time, Gondwana. Picture a colossal supercontinent made up of what we now know as Antarctica, India, Arabia, Australia, Africa, and South America, all fused together into one enormous stretch of land. But while the land itself was vast and impressive, it was the waters surrounding it that would leave you truly shaken. These seas were like nature's ultimate testing ground, where evolution was hard at work crafting some of the most terrifying aquatic creatures the world has ever seen. And if you were smart, you'd steer clear of the highlighted areas on any ancient map, because that's where something truly monstrous was taking shape, the world's first giant, jawed fish. Now, technically, these jawed fish had been around since the Silurian period, but during the Devonian, they underwent what can only be described as a major upgrade. Maybe it was thanks to the steady, temperate climate of the time, or maybe nature just decided it was time to raise the stakes. Whatever the reason, the result was a superfamily of fish so deadly that they still have a reputation as prehistoric legend, the Dunkleosteatia. These weren't your average fish. This was a family of placoderms, or armored fish, and they didn't just exist in the ecosystem, they owned it. They became the apex predators of the Devonian seas, claiming the top spot on the food chain and leading this family of aquatic nightmares was none other than the Dunkleosteus. If there were a most wanted poster for prehistoric sea monsters, Dunkleosteus would be front and center. This thing wasn't just another big fish in the sea, it was the big fish in the sea. If you think a modern great white shark is scary, then brace yourself. Dunkleosteus was like a great white, But if someone cranked up every stat to the max, stronger, heavier, more terrifying, it was essentially a swimming tank, covered head to tail in thick, bony armor plates. Its skull and the front part of its body were protected by enormous slabs of solid bone, like a natural suit of armor. So, if by some horrible luck you ever found yourself in its jaws, forget trying to fight your way out. Punching, kicking, none of it would work. It wouldn't even notice. And if the armor wasn't scary enough, let's talk about its size. Dunkleosteus wasn't just big, it was massive. Now, because the only fossilized parts we have are its bony head plates, scientists have to estimate its full body size. This has led to a lot of debate over the years, with estimates ranging from 4.1 meters 13 feet all the way up to 10 meters 33 feet. For perspective, that's roughly the length of a large SUV at its smallest and a city bus at its largest. But most experts today agree that 5 meters 16 feet is the best estimate, which just so happens to be the same length as a full-grown great white shark. But here's the catch. It wasn't just long. It was heavy. Thanks to its armored build, even a small Dunkleosteus weighed over 2 tons. That's heavier than the largest great white shark ever recorded. So, let's recap. You've got a 16-foot-long, 2-ton armored predator with jaws strong enough to crush through bone and plates of armor that make it practically indestructible. Oh, and it doesn't just stay in one area. Fossil evidence shows Dunkleosteus lived in the coastal waters of North America, Europe, and Africa, so avoiding it would be next to impossible. It could hunt in shallow waters near the coast and venture out into the open ocean, meaning no matter where you swam, you were never truly safe. And that's why Dunkleosteus isn't just a prehistoric curiosity, it's the original sea monster. It was the first true multi-ton, fully armored predator capable of hunting anything, anywhere. And if you're wondering why so many people have an instinctive fear of deep water, well, it's not hard to imagine how creatures like Dunkleosteus might be to blame. Sometimes, it's not what you can see in the water that scares you, it's what's hidden just beneath the surface. Here's a chilling thought. The Dunkleosteus we know from fossils might not even be the largest one out there. Fossil evidence is notoriously incomplete, and since only parts of its skull and armor tend to get preserved, it's entirely possible that even bigger versions existed. And sure, some might think the smaller size estimates make it less terrifying, but in reality, that just makes it worse. Why? Because smaller apex predators are often more agile, faster, and far better suited to chase down prey our size. If Dunkleosteus were only 16 feet long instead of 30, guess what? To a human, that's still massive. And suddenly, we're not just a bystander in its world, we're on the menu. And make no mistake, if Dunkleosteus wanted to turn you into a snack, it wouldn't have to try very hard. Its most fearsome weapon was its jaw, and oh, what a jaw it was. Unlike modern predators with sharp teeth, Dunkleosteus had something far more nightmarish: 2 enormous, razor-sharp bone plates that functioned like a pair of biological guillotines. When this thing chomped down, those bony plates slammed together with so much force that they didn't just cut, they crush. Imagine the power behind that bite for a second. Experts estimate that its jaws could generate up to 80,000 pounds per square inch psi of pressure. For context, that's more force than any living or extinct fish has ever produced. But it gets crazier. That bite force was stronger than a .50 caliber bullet's impact. Think about that. A .50 cal round can blow through steel, and Dunkleosteus could do that with its mouth over and over again. But here's where things go from scary to straight up unfair. It wasn't just strong, it was fast. Dunkleosteus didn't open its jaws like most fish do. It used a specialized 4-bar linkage system, the same mechanical system seen in pump jacks used for oil extraction. This system allowed its jaws to snap open at lightning speed, achieving full extension in just 20 to 60 milliseconds. That's twice as fast as the time it takes you to blink. And this rapid opening of its jaws created a sudden, violent suction in the water. Prey didn't just have to worry about being bitten, they had to worry about being pulled in by a mini underwater vacuum. One moment, you're swimming safely in front of it. The next, you're being sucked into those massive bone plates with zero chance of escape. If you're wondering how effective this whole system was, let's just say the results are still visible on the fossil record. Scientists have found the remains of other large Devonian fish, like Titanogenes, that show telltale bite marks left by Dunkleosteus. And what's even more unnerving is that Dunkleosteus wasn't picky. It didn't just hunt other species, it hunted its own kind. That's right, Dunkleosteus wasn't just king of the sea, it was also a cannibal. No other predator could match it, so sometimes it turned on itself. It was a monster with no rival. And when you're at the top, sometimes the only thing left to eat is your own reflection. But don't think for a second that Dunkleosteus was the only horror lurking in the Devonian waters. It was far from alone. More than a dozen other members of its terrifying family shared the seas, and some of them were just as bad. These weren't just big fish, they were limb-ripping, flesh-tearing beasts that would make a modern bull shark look like a goldfish. Among them were creatures like Eastmonosteus and Westerlichthy, both of which were smaller relatives of Dunkleosteus, but still large enough to ruin your day. These monsters prowled the waters of ancient Australia, and though they weren't as big as their infamous cousin, they were still built for hunting. If a human-sized swimmer were unlucky enough to cross paths with one, well, let's just say the swimmer wouldn't be telling the story. The Devonian wasn't just the age of fish, it was the age of nightmare. With Dunkleosteus leading the charge and its extended family of armored, shark-like predators backing it up, the oceans became a no-swim zone for anything that wasn't a predator itself. If you think modern oceans are scary, try imagining a world where every coastal reef and shallow sea is patrolled by armored giants, high-speed hunters, and jawed monsters that could crush bone like it was wet paper. This was the Devonian. This is where Thalassophobia began. If you thought Dunkleosteus was bad news, here's something even worse. Its entire superfamily had a near-global presence and spanned practically the entire Devonian period. Translation: no matter where you went or when you went, odds are you'd run into at least one of these aquatic nightmares. Imagine every beach, reef, or shallow sea being patrolled by an overpowered aquatic Pac-Man with jaws of doom. And as if that wasn't enough, there was actually a Dunkleosteatia member bigger than Dunkleostea. Enter Heterostea. At first glance, Heterosteus didn't even look like it belonged in the same family as Dunkleostea. Where Dunk was all sharp edges, bony plates, and a come-at-me attitude, Heterosteus was smooth, wide, and kind of blobby. Think whale shark, and you're on the right track. But despite its looks, it was still very much a part of the same lineage. Paleontologists believe its similarity to modern whale sharks wasn't a coincidence. It's an example of convergent evolution, where two unrelated animals evolved to look alike because they live similar lifestyle. In Heterostea's case, that lifestyle may have been plankton. Yep, this monster may have spent its days swimming with its mouth open, gulping down tiny plankton. And here's the kicker, doing that may have allowed it to grow to insane sizes. One species, Heterosteus's muse, is estimated to have reached a whopping 6 meters 20 feet in length. That's about the size of a modern-day orca. Except, instead of smooth, rubbery skin, it had armor-like plating. And just to make things extra creepy, there's still debate about whether it only ate plankton. Some think Heterosteus may have been a part-time predator, stalking the seafloor like a modern-day stargazer fish, blending in with the seabed before ambushing prey. If that's the case, swimming over it would be like walking over a landmine, except it's hungry. But just in case you were hoping the harmless giant angle might bring some comfort, let me introduce you to another Devonian heavyweight, Titanoches. This one looked way more like Dunkleostea, and at first glance, you probably think it had the same bad intention. But appearances can be deceiving. Despite looking like a dunk, Titanoches was part of an entirely different placoderm superfamily, the Dinoctheloida. And unlike its terrifying cousins, it was a certified gentle giant. Paleontologists believe it was a filter feeder, meaning it sucked in small fish and plankton like a living vacuum. It didn't have sharp teeth or jagged plates like Dunkleostea, but if you were swimming and saw one of these 25-foot, 7.6 meters titans gliding toward you, you'd probably freak out anyway. With massive fins cutting through the water like shark fins, this thing would have triggered every ounce of primal fear in you. And yeah, it might not have been interested in eating you, but that wouldn't stop you from mistaking it for a supersized shark with armor plating. And while Titanoches might have been one of the biggest fish of its time, it wasn't alone. Its family was packed with smaller, but no less unsettling, creatures. Two of the scariest members of this family were Bungardius and Dinocthes. These guys were like Dunkleosteus light, not as big, but just as mean. Imagine all the deadly traits of a dunk packed into a smaller frame. Both of them grew to over 3 meters 10 feet in length, which might not sound like much, but remember, that's bigger than a modern bull shark. And a bull shark is one of the most aggressive sharks on Earth. Now, here's where Bungardius takes it to the next level. Not only did it have sharp jaws and a predator's physique, but it also had a built-in spear at the end of its mouth. Yep, it's like someone took a swordfish's bill and slapped it on a prehistoric killing machine. Imagine being in the water with something like that. You'd be dodging bites and jabs from the ocean's version of a jousting knight. So, to recap, Devonian waters were basically the stuff of nightmare. You had Dunkleostea, the apex predator with jaws like a guillotine, Heterostea, a 20-foot armored whale shark lookalike that may have ambushed prey from below, and Titanoches, a 25-foot filter-feeding behemoth that looked way scarier than it actually was. And even if you somehow avoided all those, you'd still have to deal with the dunk mimics like Bungardius with its spear mouth and Dinocthes with its sharp, predatory grin. No safe zones, no lifeguards, and no chance of survival. If there's one takeaway, it's this: if you ever find yourself in a time machine, don't pick the Devonian. It wasn't the age of fish, it was the age of fear. If you thought Dunkleosteus and its relatives were enough to make you never want to dip a toe in Devonian waters, think again. The age of fish didn't get its name by accident. It wasn't just about a handful of famous sea terrors. It was about a whole army of aquatic nightmare. And some of the most underrated yet absolutely horrifying members of this ancient league of fear were the onychodoniforms. These primitive, lobe-finned fish were everywhere during the Devonian, spanning oceans across the globe. And while they may have a shared ancestry with coelacanths, those weird living fossil fish we still have today, that's about where the similarities end. If you saw one of these monsters up close, you wouldn't be marveling at its evolutionary significance. You'd be busy trying to get away. That's because the onychodoniforms were lethal not just to small fish, but to big-bodied prey too. And a lot of that comes down to one horrifying advantage: their skulls were flexible. While most fish have rigid skulls, these guys had heads pieced together like a loose jigsaw puzzle, with bones that weren't even fully connected in some spots. Why does that matter? Well, this loose, kinetic structure meant they could open their jaws like a snake, snapping them shut with blinding speed, and thanks to the loose bones, they didn't have to worry about skull fractures when dealing with struggling prey. The result: these fish could bite faster, wider, and more violently than most other predators of their time, giving them the ability to swallow prey that was far too big for other fish their size. But the absolute pinnacle of this group's evolutionary madness was the onychodus, the undisputed king of onychodoniforms. This beast didn't just hang around in one spot. It had a cosmopolitan range, meaning it was found everywhere: shallow water, deep water, coral reefs. No spot was safe. Adults of this species could reach a massive for meters 12 feet in length and tip the scales at over 160 kilograms 350 pounds. That's the size of a modern lion prowling the depths of the sea. And it didn't just rely on size to make it scary. It was a stealth expert too. Paleontologists believe it had a sneaky hunting style, using its sturdy front fins to walk along the reef floor or hover just beneath unsuspecting prey. Then, with a sudden burst from its powerful tail, it would launch upward like an aquatic missile, snatching its victim before it even knew what hit it. And if you think that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, it gets worse. We know from fossil evidence that onychodus didn't just nibble on prey, it swallowed them whole. One fossilized onychodus was found with the placoderm stuffed inside its stomach. The placoderm was nearly half the size of its predator. Half its size. To put that in perspective, imagine a predator today eating something the size of a full-grown human in one gulp. No chewing, no struggle, just gone. That's what this fish did. And while getting gulped whole might sound like a relatively quick way to go, you might have actually preferred it to the alternative. Because onychodus wasn't just a fish with a big mouth. It was armed with a set of jaws that could only be described as a nightmare factory. Picture this: an entire mouth filled with long, needle-like teeth that were designed to pierce and hold onto flesh with. Every single bite would leave deep puncture wounds. But it gets even worse. At the very front of its mouth, it had two massive, fang-like tusks that could move. Yes, you read that right. These fangs weren't locked in place. They were mounted on a retractable mechanism, meaning these tusks could be thrust forward like spears. With a flick of its jaws, it could jab its tusks deep into its prey, puncturing it like a harpoon. Visibility alone gave onychodus an edge over just about everything else in its environment. If it couldn't swallow you whole, it would just stab you to death. So, to sum it all up, the onychodoniforms weren't just an afterthought in the Devonian seas. They were among its most terrifying killers. Their loose, flexible skulls allowed them to bite bigger, harder, and faster. Their flagship predator, onychodus, was like a lion that prowled every ocean on Earth. It was sneaky, fast, and capable of swallowing prey nearly as big as itself. And if you somehow avoided being swallowed, you'd be met with retractable, spear-like fangs that could strike like daggers. If Dunkleosteus was the guillotine of the Devonian, onychodus was the stealthy assassin hiding in the shadows. It didn't just hunt its prey, it executed them. If you thought sharks were the only sleek, fast, and terrifying predators patrolling the Devonian seas, think again. Because lurking in those ancient waters was a whole squad of what we can only call copycat sharks, the Thalassophobia. These guys looked like sharks, swam like sharks, and probably acted like sharks. But plot twist, they weren't sharks at all. In fact, they were closer relatives of the chimeras, those spooky deep-sea ghost sharks of today. Imagine that, a ghost shark that looks like a regular shark, but isn't a shark. If that doesn't give off uncanny valley vibe, I don't know what does. Unlike the globe-trotting Dunkleosteus and its cousins, Thalassophobia had a much more limited hangout spot. Fossil evidence tells us they were mostly chilling in just two places: the ancient waters that covered parts of modern-day Morocco and North America. Not exactly the world tour you'd expect, but what they lacked in range, they made up for in fossil quality. These fossils weren't just bones and teeth. Some preserved their skin, muscle fibers, and even internal organs. That's a fossilization miracle right there. Thanks to these finds, paleontologists know way more about Thalassophobia than most of its Devonian neighbors. For starters, these fish were about the size of modern reef sharks, not enormous, but definitely big enough to make you reconsider snorkeling trips. Their heads looked a lot like those of frilled sharks, those creepy, eel-like sharks that haunt the deep sea today. But their bodies were sleek and torpedo-shaped, kind of like modern mackerel sharks. Think mako sharks, the fastest sharks in the ocean. This body shape wasn't just for show, it was for speed and agility. And boy, did it work. We know from fossilized stomach contents that Thalassophobia weren't picky eaters. Rayfin fish, conodonts, those weird, extinct eel-like creatures, hagfish-like animals, and even arthropods were all on the menu. But here's where it gets even more impressive. They didn't just gulp down prey at random, they hunted smart. Evidence shows they preferred to eat prey tail first, a strategy that makes it harder for prey to escape during the gulp. That's some next-level seafood strategy. But it wasn't just strategy that made them deadly, it was their teeth. Their three-pronged teeth acted like grappling hooks, locking onto struggling prey and giving the Thalassophobia the option to either swallow it whole or thrash it around until it stopped moving. And just when you thought they couldn't get more advanced, here comes the kicker. They were one of the first vertebrates to evolve tooth replacement. That means if one of their teeth broke or wore down, no problem. A fresh, sharp replacement was already on the way. Imagine being able to instantly regrow your teeth every time you chomp on something hard. It's basically a lifetime warranty on your bite. With predators like the Thalassophobia, the Heterostia, and the shark-mimicking Thalassophobia running the show, you think the Devonian seas had enough horror to offer. But nature doesn't do just enough. It does extra, and in this case, extra came in the form of creatures that weren't even fish. Say hello to the Eurypterids, better known as sea scorpion. And yes, they look as unsettling as they sound. Picture a scorpion, but bulkier, more armored, and living underwater. Now picture it bigger. Feel that chill on your spine? Good. You're starting to understand the vibe of the Devonian seas. Despite the name, sea scorpions weren't actually scorpions. Their closest living relatives today are horseshoe crabs, but don't let that fool you into thinking they were harmless. Just like modern scorpions, Eurypterids had segmented bodies, jointed legs, and some of them even had telsons, those stinger-like tails. And it wasn't just for show. Paleontologists believe some sea scorpions may have been venomous. The main suspect, Eusarchus, a 2.5-foot, 0.8-meter long sea scorpion with a tail that looks suspiciously like a scorpion's stinger. Now, while a sting from Eusarchus probably wouldn't have been a pleasant experience, at least it wasn't human-sized. But the Devonian had to up the stakes, of course. As time passed, sea scorpions got bigger and meaner. Early in the Devonian, one genus of Eurypterid dominated most of the fossil record. But by the mid-Devonian, the seas were crawling with over 100 different kinds. And they weren't just growing in number, they were growing in size. Some of these monsters reached lengths that could rival a grown human. So now you're not just worried about getting bitten, thrashed, or gulped whole by Dunkleosteus and Thalassophobia. You've also got to watch out for gigantic, armored, water-dwelling scorpions with stingers that might be venomous. The Devonian wasn't just the age of fish, it was the age of nope. If you thought the sea scorpions we mentioned earlier were terrifying, get ready to meet their heavyweight champion, Echolopterus, a creature that makes modern crabs and lobsters look like harmless appetite. This monstrous arthropod wasn't just big, it was huge. Imagine a scorpion stretched to over 0.5 meters, that's about 8.2 feet, longer than the average human. Oh, and did I mention it weighed as much as a fully grown reindeer? Now picture that reindeer-sized sea scorpion gliding toward you through the water with the precision of a torpedo. Chills, right? But oddly enough, Echolopterus didn't have a stinger. Instead, it relied on something arguably scarier, a specialized swimming tail that allowed it to stage high-speed ambush. Once it got close, it didn't need venom or a stinger. Nope. It had something much more brutal, pincers. And not just any pincers. These things were 1 meter long, 3 feet, and packed with serrated, uneven spikes along their edges. These natural weapons could clamp down with ridiculous force, gripping slippery prey and dragging them straight into its waiting mat. But that's not all. These pincers were also perfectly equipped for tearing and shredding. Paleontologists actually found a fossilized fish with puncture wounds that perfectly matched the bite pattern of Echolopterus's pincers. So, to sum it up, this creature could crush you, grip you, stab you, and tear you apart. Fun times, right? But Echolopterus wasn't the only sea scorpion with unique tactics. Each Eurypterid had its own hunting strategy, making them the ultimate underwater rogues gallery. Some were armed with razor-sharp telsons, that's a fancy way of saying knife tail, to slash and stab prey like some sort of medieval knight. Others preferred to scoop prey up with wide, claw-like arms, while some even sifted through the ocean floor like nature's earliest vacuum cleaner. This last strategy might sound less scary, but don't be fooled. It led to the rise of the absolute unit of the Eurypterid family, Hibbertoptera. This behemoth may have been close in length to Echoloptera, but its broad, bulky body made it significantly heavier. How heavy, you ask? Possibly as heavy as a fully grown cat. Imagine a waterborne tank with legs, and you're getting close to the mental limit. Now, here's the good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it. Hibbertopterus may not have been an open ocean predator like Echoloptera. There's debate among scientists about whether these tank-like creatures lived in freshwater rivers and lakes, or if they stuck to coastal environment. Either way, you wouldn't want to meet one. But speaking of rivers and lakes, you might think freshwater would be a safer place to swim, right? Wrong. The Devonian period turned rivers and lakes into danger zone. It was during this time that Earth's first true river monsters emerged, and trust me, you wouldn't want to cross paths with them. Leading the charge were the Tristicoptera, a family of large, powerful, and highly adaptable fish. They were a diverse bunch, showing up in lakes and rivers across the planet. Some were small and harmless, about the size of a ruler, but others were downright shark-sized. One in particular deserves a special shout-out, Hyneria. This was no average fish. It was a beast that could match the size of the largest bull sharks alive today. And if you know anything about bull sharks, you know they're one of the most dangerous sharks on the planet, capable of attacking animals much larger than themselves. Now imagine that same level of danger, but swap the shark's serrated teeth for straight, spear-like fangs measuring 5 centimeters to inches. That's twice as long as a bull shark's tooth, and every one of them was designed to sink into slippery prey. Unlike sharks, Hyneria didn't need to bite and shake its food. Those spear-like teeth acted like nature's most effective harpoon. Once it latched on, there was no escape. And if you think murky, debris-filled waters would give you a chance to avoid it, think again. Hyneria had sensory adaptations that made it a living underwater heat-seeking missile. It had sensory canals along its face and body that detected even the faintest movements in the water, meaning that no matter how dark or murky the river was, Hyneria could still see you, even when you couldn't see it. But here's the kicker. This nightmare fish didn't even need you to be in the water to be a threat. If you were just standing near the water's edge, you weren't safe. Think of modern predatory fish like pike, barracuda, or alligator gar, which sometimes ambush prey from beneath. Now multiply that threat by 10. The Devonian wasn't a time where you could casually grab a drink from the riverbank. With monsters like Hyneria lurking beneath the surface, even thirst was a liability. So, let's recap. In the Devonian, the ocean wasn't safe. Thanks to colossal sea scorpions like Echolopterus and armored tank beasts like Hibbertoptera. Rivers and lakes, nope, not safe either. Hyneria and its kin were there to make sure you'd never trust fresh water again. It's no wonder that for so many animals, staying on land became the better option. But even that came with its own set of terrors, and that's a story for another time. Just when you thought it was safe to step out of the water, nature hits you with a plot twist. Turns out, Tristicopterids, the same terrifying fish that ruled rivers and lakes, may not have been content to stay in the water. Some paleontologists believe these river monsters could launch themselves onto land, using their powerful, muscular fins to propel onto muddy banks and snatch unsuspecting prey. So, if you thought staying on shore would keep you safe, and believe it or not, they weren't the only creatures pulling off this amphibious assault. Enter the Elpisostigalia, a bizarre clade of animals that looked like the ultimate mashup of a fish and a tetrapod. These were the OG fishopods, a nickname often given to Tiktaalik, one of the most famous of the bunch. Technically, Tiktaalik was a fish, but looking at it, you'd swear it was halfway to becoming an amphibian. It had the full fish package: gills, scales, and fins. But it also rocked some serious land-based upgrades like functional wrists, rib bones, lungs, and a proper neck, giving it the flexibility to turn its head. This combo of aquatic and terrestrial traits meant Tiktaalik could push itself through shallow water and even haul its scaly body across muddy flats, a lot like modern mudskippers do today. So, if you happen to be wandering by a swampy area at the wrong time, guess what? Tiktaalik could come after you. And if you're picturing Tiktaalik as a cute little fish that flops around on land, wrong. Thanks to the Mandela effect, many people think Tiktaalik was small. But nope, this beast was a 3-meter-long 9-foot predator. For perspective, that's longer than a kayak and larger than most crocodiles. With that size, it's no wonder Tiktaalik probably didn't have many predators. Instead, it was the predator, and with 2 rows of sharp teeth lining its jaws, it wasn't living off seaweed. Scientists think it could eat pretty much anything that fit in its mouth, and with its croc-like skull, it definitely looked the part of a swampy ambush hunter. And if Tiktaalik wasn't bad enough, it had a relative named Panderichthys, which was just as scary. This one could be taller than an NFL player if it stood upright, and it came with a skull that was even more compact, dense, and tank-like than Tiktaalik's. If you somehow dodged Tiktaalik, Panderichthys was there as the final boss. Moral of the story: if you value your life, stay away from the water. So, what was it about the Devonian period that turned every waterway into an aquatic horror movie? It's like something flipped a switch, and suddenly every fish, scorpion, and mystery creature decided to become a super predator. But it wasn't just the oceans and rivers that were going through big changes. The land was getting a massive glow up too. This was the time when the Earth's first major forests were taking shape. The earliest trees and plants were evolving, and with them came the first greening of the planet. Before this, if you looked at Earth from space, it would have been mostly brown and gray. But thanks to these new, fast-spreading plants, patches of green began to appear across the continent, transforming the look of the Earth forever. This green revolution didn't just make the landscape prettier. It brought in an entirely new cast of creepy crawlies to land. Mites, scorpions, myriapods, and spider-like creatures called trigonotarbids started showing up on the forest floor, along with the first amphibian-like creature, the stem tetrapods like Acanthostica. But guess what was the biggest thing on land at the time? Not a dinosaur, not a reptile, not even an animal. It was a fungus. Yep, a fungus called prototaxites ruled the land. This thing grew to be 8 meters tall, 26 feet. That's as tall as a 2-story building. Picture a forest of giant mushroom-like trunks scattered across the land, giving the planet a spiky appearance. It's wild to think that at one point, The most intimidating thing you'd see on land was essentially a towering log of fungus. But as always, nature has a way of hitting the reset button. Right at the end of the Devonian, the planet was struck by one of the most devastating extinctions in history, the Late Devonian extinction. It wasn't just one event, but a series of catastrophic die-offs that started about 372 million years ago and hit the underwater world especially hard. The oceans, which had been full of nightmare-fuel creatures like Dunkleosteus, onychodontiforms, and Tristicopterids, were emptied out. Entire groups were wiped off the evolutionary tree, and those that survived were basically put on a factory reset. It's estimated that 50% of all genera on Earth were gone by the end of this extinction event. What caused all this chaos? Honestly, scientists are still trying to figure that out. It's like looking at a crime scene with too many suspects. Some think it was caused by massive volcanic eruptions that release clouds of gas and ash, while others blame the spread of plants themselves, which may have altered the soil and ocean chemistry in unexpected ways. Other theories point to a possible meteor impact or even a supernova explosion hitting the planet with deadly radiation. The truth: it was probably a combination of several of these disasters happening at once, like nature hitting the planet with a combo move straight out of a fighting game. And while all of this was terrible news for ocean creatures, it was great news for future land dwellers. With the waterways cleared of most predators, things on land got a little safer for a while. But if there's one thing we know about nature, it's that calm periods never last long. Eventually, new predators would rise to take their place, and the cycle of terror would start all over again. So, with that in mind, stay safe, stay dry, and remember, if you think something's hiding in the water, it probably is. Until next time, this has been a Sink Zoo.